think I'm live right now? So let's just begin. Hi, everyone. My name is Messdaghi, and today we're going to talk about how do we get rights finally. And I am so thrilled to do this talk with you because it's deep. It's something that I really care about deeply, as you are probably aware of. So let's dive into the real reason why you're here today. So this talk is completely dedicated to every single one of you who has been scared to disclose, and for what you do, and also to any of the hackers in the community that have been prosecuted or threatened with a lawsuit for trying to do something good or doing their job. And to all the people who are in the fight to bring rights for hackers behind scenes, I salute you. And of course, to you for watching this talk, because you're probably here because you want to change the circumstances. For those that do not know, my name is Messdaghi, and I'm the co-founder of Hacking Is Not a Crime, also the co-founder of We Open Tech, and I'm a strategy growth consultant in tech and infosec. That is my URL. If you want to learn anything about me, it's probably on there, but that is my Twitter and Instagram handle. Feel free to add me, and also note that my DMs are open. So if you have any questions after this talk, and it's been a few days, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. All right, now let's get into why you all are here. First things first is that for those that aren't aware of what is Hacking Is Not a Crime, which is this organization that I co-founded with Brian, is that we're basically a grassroots movement that is trying to change and challenge the public perceptions of how they view hackers in the community. In other words, the reality is that we have laws that have been around since the 1980s. And this is because there was no representation at the time of our voices at the table. And so they have lumped us in one group that attackers and hackers are the same thing. And so this public perception is the reason why we're kind of stuck and why we haven't gotten rights or protections. So we have to change that narrative. And so that's what Hacking Is Not a Crime is all about. It's a grassroots movement of the hacker community coming together to try to challenge public perception of what is a hacker, who is a hacker, but also to want to push an advocacy for rights, because we need them at this point. It's been the longest time ever. So that's what we basically do. But for those that aren't aware that, yes, there's two parties that do exist in our field, I just want to talk about that very quickly so we're all on the same page. So first things first, what is a hacker versus attacker? And I always say it's the intent. So basically, a hacker, also known as security researcher, basically uses skills to keep things secured. They never extort, they stay within scope, and they exploit with permission only. Now, the overall intent for a hacker is to protect and serve, is to do well. However, an attacker uses the exact same skill set, but to do something that could hurt. So in a sense, this could hurt and extort. This means exploiting without permission. This means going out of scope often, but the intent is somehow criminal. So an attacker may also go by criminal, cyber criminal, malicious actor. But the thing, as you are probably aware, is that in the press, it's also reported that attacker is the same as a hacker. And so this is a huge problem that we're facing because a lot of the times public doesn't know that these two parties coexist. But the thing is that they're very different because they have what they do is the intent of it all. So I want to talk about the current landscape so everyone is on the same page, because I don't know what everyone's backgrounds is, but I want everyone to have an idea of why we need rights and why it's so important. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then I'm going to dive into the social constructed part of it all, of why we are where we are, and how do we challenge these socially constructed beliefs so then we can have change, because you have to get the public on board to have rights or for them to even listen. So let's dive into the current landscape. And one of my favorite stories that I like to share is the case study of Kevin and what he had to deal with DJI. It was his case that I remember learning about from Amit El-Azhari's talk that made me want to get into hacker rights. because it fumigated me. I was so upset. So for those that do not know, DJI, a major drone manufacturer, basically created a bug bounty program. Now, this bug bounty platform program itself, that you should note, is that they ran it themselves. They didn't go through HackerOne, BugCrowd, or Synack. They went for it themselves. So this is already letting you know ahead of the time that this might be a problem. And if you're wondering why would this be a problem, is because having vulnerability disclosure programs and bug bounty programs that are run in-house, you need to have the staff to do that. And a lot of times they just, when they release a bug bounty program within their own house, they go full on run. The thing is that you want to do kind of like this crawl, walk, run approach, because when you want to make sure you have all the foundations and structures in place. And with DJI, this was their situation, was that they just created a bug bounty program because they thought this might be a good thing to do. But in reality, they didn't have the infrastructure set and in place. So when hackers participated, they were facing some issues. Kevin, unfortunately, was one of those cases. So Kevin basically came across their bug bounty program, and he wanted to make sure everything that was stated, on their site, what was in scope, that he wanted to reconfirm it just for his own safety and protection. So he sent them an email basically asking if all these things are within scope, just to double confirm before participating in their vulnerability disclosure program or their bug bounty program. And what happened was that it took 2 weeks for them to respond. So once again, remember I was saying, like, when you're doing it in your own house, if you don't have an infrastructure in place, you're going to have problems. They didn't have the infrastructure in place, clearly, because it took 2 weeks for them to respond on something that was already posted elsewhere of what was in scope. So, but besides that, Kevin did find a vulnerability and he reported it. They wanted to offer him $30,000. So to be able to receive this $30,000, he had to sign an agreement. However, this agreement offered no legislative, well, not legislative, but it didn't offer any legal protections for him. And he was like, I'm not going to take this risk. 30,000 is not worth my life at risk here. So he walked away. But the thing was that DJI, they were a little bit afraid. Their marketing, PR team, and legal team were all nervous that he may become one of those people that outs them in public and they have to face a PR situation. Kevin wasn't planning on doing any of that. He was already moving on to other things, but they were afraid that he would. So what ended up happening was that they served him with a letter, which you see here, basically saying that he went out of scope when in fact he stayed within scope, and that he was breaking the CFAA, which is in law that we'll get into in a bit. But basically saying that it was his fault, he stepped out of line, and that they're going to go after and pursue him in court. Now, the one thing you should note, though, is that in their communications with them, if he scrolled down all the way through the chain, and there was internal communication that was happening. That's how he found out that they saw him as a threat, a legal threat, a PR situation, because it was stated within the text of the email, because the person who sent him an email didn't realize there was an internal chain within this email. And so what he did was that he basically published every single email communication he's ever had with DJI publicly to try to protect himself. DJI then retracted it, because then the reality was that they had no case. He basically proved them. But the thing was that it put his life in jeopardy because he was just trying to protect and serve. And he stayed within scope. He did all the right things, but yet they still had the ability to do this. And this is something that is common. This isn't like a one-off situation. This is fairly common. So this is one of the things we have to talk about, is like, how do we fix this So we don't have any more cases like Kevin is dealing with, or some of our friends and family have dealt with. And this is why we have to influence the public perception of who we are. Now, if you remember anything about political science, if you've taken any political courses, the thing that you always remember is that if you're going to influence the public opinion, you have to work with the media, organizations, and legislation. That's how you change things. They all intersect with one another. So it's so important that we do this. You can't just focus on one thing. You have to focus on all three to be able to have change. So, for example, for the organizations to learn how to do better policies, such as having vulnerability disclosure policies, that they turn to the media, they turn to legislation. For legislation to actually have anything being presented of any change or amendments to any acts out there, they need to have first media around it. Otherwise, they're not going to know that this is an issue. So organizations and media can push issues for legislators to look at and look into to create new things. The media plays a huge role because the media is what actually starts forming and creating these socially constructed beliefs. And a lot of times, socially constructed beliefs, which we're going to go into, are also stereotypes that aren't actually true. So the thing is that the public is totally influenced by the media, organizations, and legislation. So that's why you have to work with all three of these groups. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how do we do this? Because it's a lot of work. Well, the first step is you got to know how human behavior works. So for all your social engineers out there or people that are trying to become a social engineer, I'm going to teach you something here about the fear response. But before we do that, you first need to always be aware of what is a socially constructed belief. So social construction theory says that humans create constructs in order to make sense of the objective world that we live in. And the one way humans create social constructs is by structuring what they see and experiences into categories. I know it seems really simple. It's simplified. It is. It's completely you simplifying people, things around you to make sense of things, to make it easier to understand. But the thing you need to understand is that things are not black and white. If anything, they're multiple shades of gray. And the thing we need to understand here is that socially constructed beliefs are stereotypes. It's stereotypes of how the world works and how people that live in this world work and who they are. So socially constructed beliefs of the hacker community has been, as you know, in movies, from books, from TV shows, hackers are bad people. In other words, they are attackers. It's very rare to have a quote unquote ethical hacker in a movie or a TV show. But the thing to understand is that it's really hard to challenge that perception. So socially constructed beliefs are really important for us to understand because that is how we function and understand the world. But socially constructed beliefs themselves can also cause us to have a fear response. So I'm going to use an example with you so then you have a better understanding with an example how we process threats. Because it's important for you to understand through an example to be able to understand how we all function and how we can actually challenge these beliefs. So I want you to, we're just going to pretend, okay? Pretend that there's no hair coloring kits out there in the world. You're either born with your hair that way and there's no way you can fix it. But there are certain people that are born with pink hair. Now, the thing to know is that a person with pink hair just has pink hair. There's no difference other than they just have pink hair. And it's genetic. So it's passed on. So the thing to understand is that pink hair people are out there and they live there. And there's no way you can challenge that or change a hair color. And you're probably like, where are you going with this? So imagine that when growing up, that on the TV, whenever you turn on the news, the person who's always the dangerous character is the person with pink hair. So every time you turn on the news, it's someone with pink hair. Anytime that you listen to the radio, it always says another person with pink hair robbed this person. Or whenever you read a book, it's always the person with pink hair that you know is going to be the bad guy. So the thing is that people with pink hair are somehow, we've been ingrained to believe, are dangerous people, criminals, if you could say. Now, the thing to note is that because you have been taught and believed, directly and indirectly that pink hair people are dangerous, you have created this memory, this storage of survival. So the thing you need to know about your brain is that there's this part of your brain called the amygdala. It's an almond-shaped tissue that's within your temporal lobe. Your temporal lobe is basically the part of your brain that puts your memories and your sensations and your feelings in one place. And the thing is that it also provides a guideline or a structure or a mapping system as well, like a GPS. Now, the amygdala is something important to acknowledge because the amygdala, you may have heard of it, it's a fight versus flight mechanism, but it's also a fight versus flight and standing completely still, shocked and terrified. So there's actually three things with the amygdala. It's not just you run away or you fight something. You also can be scared out of your mind and just staying completely still. Now, the amygdala is completely subconscious when it's working in your brain. But the thing is that it's taking memories and social constructive beliefs and put it into use. So say, for example, you're walking down the street and there's someone with a pink hair behind you. Now, the person with pink hair behind you, once again, it's just a person with pink hair. But the thing is that you have these socially constructed beliefs in society that people with pink hair are dangerous individuals. So for you, you're going to walk down the street and the person with pink hair is behind you. And then your amygdala flips in a sense that it's saying, warning, warning, danger alert, someone with pink hair is behind you. This warning is then from the amygdala sent to the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex acts like the CEO of your brain. And while it's processing information, it's completely conscious now. So everything that you're doing is now a conscious decision or a conscious thing that you are doing at that moment, versus the amygdala was completely subconscious. You have no idea that's going on. But the amygdala alerts the prefrontal cortex to let it know that there is a perceived threat. So then the prefrontal cortex has to use logic and reasoning to break it down, to be like, okay, how do I understand if this is an actual threat? What are the actions that I can take? So this is the thing I want you to remember, is that this is a conscious decision and process now. So the amygdala sent a warning of the person with pink hair to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. Now your brain is coming up with suggestions of what to do because this is a perceived threat. First option is you can cross the street. Second option, you can go into a local store. Third option, you can clutch your bag a little bit tighter. And these three are the main ones that come through your mind. However, there's always an approach that we always forget, which is ignore. So you can ignore the threat. In other words, you can be like, you know what? I'm going to use my logic and reasoning and be like, no, I don't need to do these things. But during this time, you have those actions in your mind, and then you start breaking them down. Okay, if I cross the street, there's a chance that this person with pink hair will follow me. Does that help? Does this save me? Does this rescue me or not? Well, it will then provide me an idea to know that this person is following me actually, and that maybe this is going to be one of those moments that they're going to commit some sort of crime against me. Now, the second solution, you're thinking, okay, I could go in a store. Chances are that person might follow me. If so, I can go and tell someone that this person's following me. So I'll be safer going in a store. Or third, I could just clutch my bag a little bit tighter. So in case this person is trying to rob me, I will be okay. My bag will be okay because I'm holding on to it tight, and I'll just walk a little bit faster. And the fourth one is not taking any action. Maybe it's all in my head. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this person is just one of those very rare individuals with pink hair that isn't going to harm me. So you kind of see a little bit of how your brain is processing a threat here. But there's one thing you need to note, is that there is one way that you can challenge socially constructed beliefs and even stereotypes to this very day. And that's from having a face-to-face conversation. Kind of like how I'm doing right now with you, is that I'm telling you about something and you're seeing my face. You're seeing my emotions on my face. You're reading me at the same time you're hearing me. But the thing is, that's really interesting, is that when people share their personal stories to your face or on a camera, like FaceTiming, it brings some reality to something. It inputs a memory inside in a sense that makes you understand a little bit more about things that you didn't know about. It may actually challenge your perceptions of how the world works. For example, say that you were on YouTube and you came across a video of a person with pink hair. And in this video, the person with pink hair is sharing how hard it is to be someone with pink hair. Because every time that they see you walking, you see them as a criminal. That every time that they are behind someone who's walking, that they see that they cross the street, they go in a store, or they clutch their bag a little bit tighter, and how that impacts this person so much because they just have pink hair and they wish that the world knew that that doesn't mean that we're a bad person, and that they wish that the news, the media would actually see them for who they are, just people with pink hair and nothing else, nothing more, just regular people. There's no difference, just the fact that they have one color difference. Now, the thing is that let's go back to the moment. There's someone behind you. You're walking down the street, a person with pink hair, and you're making this conscious decision now in the prefrontal cortex. And remember those items, right? Once again, it's cross the street, go into a store, clutch your bag tighter. The fourth option is not to do anything. And at that moment, you're thinking, okay, probably the best thing is to go into the store. But then you think of that video, that YouTube video that you saw, and how that person was and how real they were in this video, talking about how hard it is to be someone with pink hair because they're always being perceived as a criminal, as a threat. And you realize, like, oh, I think I was just about to do something here that may have hurt this other person behind me. Maybe I shouldn't do anything. Maybe this is the time where, I don't see this person as a perceived threat and just test it out. And because I don't want to be the person who's in the wrong. I don't want to hurt someone here. I want to understand this. I want to have better awareness of how my actions and my words impact another individual. So you decide you're going to do the fourth option, which is to not do anything. So you make your final decision. The prefrontal cortex sends a message back to the amygdala, letting it to know to simmer down, versus when they would say to take an action of a perceived threat, it would alert your entire body and you will take the actions forward. Now, what I want to talk about is that how we perceive threats is based around socially constructed beliefs. And the thing, as you can tell, is that they're not always real and true. If anything, we have to just be aware of who we are and how we may be hurting one another by not taking further look into what we don't know. So it's really important for us to be aware of that, because this is also how the public perceives people who may be a criminal. And this could be based on their looks or the way that they dress. This could be on all these different fronts. But the reality is that we have to be understanding that this is how people process threats. But there's always that possibility of challenging it. And that's the beautiful thing here, right? Because the amygdala, you may not be able to challenge, but you are making a conscious decision when you're in your prefrontal cortex about the perceived threat. So the thing I want you all to know is that we all have the ability to question our biases, but we have to also be okay to be all right to know that we don't know everything. And that might be very uncomfortable because insecurities run in all of us. That's what's about being a human, is that we run on insecurities at times. But the reality is that when we get outside our comfort bubble, we start learning about the world. And when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we really have to understand that it's okay that we don't know everything, but we need to make that conscious decision to do better as an individual. So one of the things that hacking is not a crime, what we started doing is these hashtag hacker stories project. Basically, it's people in the community that share like why they became a hacker, the things that they love about it, but the issues that they have been facing because of it. And we want these YouTube videos to get out there in the public. We want people to see it because the thing is that the public is very curious about us, you guys. Like, they're really curious. They want to know what we look like. They want to know how we talk. They want to know what we do outside of things because they're curious. We're curious human beings. And so that's the one thing is to understand is that having these videos sharing who you are, why you do what you do, that's really important, but also to share why it impacts you that we don't have rights or protections. I probably should have stated that at the very beginning of this talk is that the reason I'm giving this talk is because we actually have no rights nor protections. And that's why we have to talk about this. So now you know, I'm not going to play the video, but I will promise I'll post it later on. But you can also go to Hack is Not a Crime and go to our YouTube page to see a bunch of them. But I mean, if you want to participate, we would love to have your video. So step 2 now. So now you know how human behavior works when it comes to a perceived threat. And also you know about social constructed beliefs. Now we're going to talk about how to influence the public perception of hackers. Because the reality is that we've already talked about this, but socially constructed beliefs stem from the media. And what is the media exactly? For those that do not know, it's marketing, it's PR, it's news, it's social media as well. It's anything that shares terminology, images, and shares stories. And so that's the thing to understand. Now, if you're wondering, how is this a problem right now? Well, the public is scared of us. And there's a reason why they're scared of us, is that when I type in ethical hacker versus criminal hacker, I get the exact same pictures. And this is one of the things is to understand is that we are going to keep getting these images unless we change and challenge people's perceptions. So when we go to, like, for example, a conference, sometimes you'll see vendor booths having these images. And this is not the imagery that we need to be using right now. Also, when we have marketing in InfoSec, a lot of times that they don't have InfoSec experience before joining an InfoSec company. So they market it as hackers are the same as attackers. So they use the wrong terminology as well. So through images, through terminology, the thing is that we're basically going to keep getting seen as a malicious actor until we challenge these terms and these images. Because it really does hurt when the media doesn't know the difference between a hacker and attacker, because we get these kind of stories. You know, we're not people that are going to be threatening to leak patients' therapy notes. We know that's a big no-no. And because we would feel guilty. That's the difference. If you think about it, at the end of the day, who is going to be more on the criminal side of the hacker community? It's going to be the ones that are not going to feel guilty. They're not going to feel guilt for doing things in a sense that can cause harm to another individual. And that's the difference, I say, at the end of the day. It's the intent, but also, do you feel guilty if you do something that's in the wrong? So the thing is that we have to correct the media politely. And politely, I mean nice. And the reason for that is because lots of the time, people just don't know. They don't know at all. So we have to challenge that in a sense by letting them know. So how can you change this type of situation? So if you're reading a news story or watching a news story, remember to be kind before you take any action. Okay, remember, have empathy. They don't know better. They just don't know. Just assume that, okay? But when you DM or comment publicly, you can also Just remember that. But it is important to correct them. So when the news uses the wrong terminology, you can actually, post it on Twitter. Be like, hey, TechCrunch, thank you for using, well, not thank you. It would be more like, hey, TechCrunch, I noticed I came across an article and you used the term a hacker when you mean attacker. And I just want to let you know that this really impacts the hacker community because we're trying to get rights. And when you use the incorrect terminology, it prevents us from even having a conversation about getting rights and protections. So you can call it out on Twitter, but just remember to be kind. They don't know better. And then see if you can set up a meeting with them. There's times where you can actually talk to the news agency because they want to know better. They want to do better because the job of a reporter and an editor is to make sure they're as accurate as possible. So if they know that they're using the wrong terminology, they have to fix that. But this isn't just, once again, about the news, but also if you see marketing using the wrong things that we see quite a bit in InfoSec. So letting them know you're using the wrong terminology. The imagery is hurtful. We got to let them know. But remember, be kind. But also give them kudos when they get it right. Whenever a news agency uses their correct terminology, I'm applauding them. I'm like, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to understand us. Thank you so much for doing your homework. And I really appreciate it. So give them kudos when they get it right, because everyone could always use a pat on the back when they do something right. Another way that you can do is contact your local news agencies and send a letter to the copy desk. The copy desk oversees all things that get published, but also sets the tone. So if there is a wrong verbiage that they're using, that they correct that for all future cases of whenever they're reporting on that subject. So sending letters like this is an example that some of us came together and sent to the New York Times. It's really important that we do this. But if you're one of those people that does provide comments to the press about the hacker community or anything around InfoSec, please remember to tell the reporter. I always do this at the very beginning of every conversation I have with the reporter, which is, by the way, I just want you to know that there is a huge difference between a hacker and attacker. And I really hope that you use the correct terminology when you provide this article to your editor. And then it usually becomes a conversation. What do you mean there's a difference? And then I have to tell them why there's a difference. And then they understand it. And then that article comes out and I see that they make sure that throughout the entire article, they're using the right terminology. And it's amazing when you see that. So reporters, they do listen. That's their job, is to listen and take notes and to do better when it comes to reporting. So keep that in mind. And also within your comments, always remind the public also in it that, there's a difference between a hacker and an attacker. And that's what I tend to do quite often. I want to reinforce this always. Now, I know this is a little controversial. I don't really want to tell people what to wear or anything like this, but I'm just suggesting that it might be a good idea to not wear a hoodie. And the reason I say that is because most of the time I get comments all the time, which is like, I thought all hackers wear hoodies. And the reality is that when I realized that when I stopped wearing a hoodie when talking to the press, I realized that they also took me more seriously too. And so that's one of the things is to think of. So you can wear a suit if you want. I think that'd be great and hilarious in many ways, but it also shows that you take it very seriously and breaking away from that stereotype that all hackers wear our hoodies and live in a dark basement and maybe wear a ski mask. So it's a good thing is to try to challenge people's public perception by knowing that what you wear does impact and does matter. Because the results of the media right now, if we don't change things, is that right now that 94% of the Forbes Global 2000 list still does not have a vulnerability disclosure policies. That means that we don't know how to contact them. And that 1 out of 4 of hackers don't report vulnerabilities when they find it because they're worried about facing a lawsuit potentially. The other thing is that we have laws that are preventing good hacking, like CFA and DMCA. We're scared of being prosecuted all the time. But also the impact of it is that we're also feeding into having more malicious actors in the situation. And if you're wondering, what do you mean by that? Well, the thing is that there are people out there that when they're told multiple times that they're a bad person because they're a hacker, it gets to a point where it's like, well, fine then I guess I'm a bad person. And then they do more malicious things. And if you're like, I'm still confused on this, let me explain this. When you have, for example, kids and they're told over and over that they're a bully, they start doing those things. Or when you start telling a kid very early on that they're stupid, they believe in it. So they don't try as hard because they believe that everyone is out already sees them as this way. So there's nothing they can do. They try to challenge it, but they give up. And that's the thing we have to understand, is that the situation that we have offers no protections for trying to protect others. And because of that, it keeps us awake at night sometimes like insomnia, because we're worried that we're going to face something and we're worried about that. And the thing is, because we don't have protections, this kind of gives it kind of like, well, fine, you don't want me here in this space, fine. I'm just going to do and take my skills and make money elsewhere. And this is the thing that we have to have probably in another talk one of these days, a conversation of how do we bring these parties together? Once again, if a bad actor feels guilt and has some sort of guilt feelings, I feel like we can't actually work with people like that. But if they don't feel guilty, those are a lost cause. So the thing is to understand is that the impact where we are without protections, and also how the society has viewed us and seen us, is that it's made it very, very hard and tricky to have a sense of that we're okay to be here and exist. And so that's one of the things that I want to talk about, is like, how do we influence legislation? So we talked about how the media impacts us because it provides the socially constructed beliefs and reinforces them. And now we're going to talk about legislation, because it's legislation that also holds us back. But before I do, one quick note on here, on that whole 1 out of 4 hackers do not report vulnerabilities. I just want you all to know that those that do report, usually it's ignored or they receive a threat. And the reason I want everyone to understand this, because I think that there are a good number of people in the hacker community that don't get this, is that you have to understand the people that are running social media are marketing folks. And marketing and security, they're kind of siloed from each other. They don't really talk with each other. So when you're trying to reach out, and usually what we see is that we DM them on social media, like on Twitter or on LinkedIn, saying, hey, I found a vulnerability I want you to know about, because I didn't see you had vulnerability disclosure policies anywhere. So I don't know who to contact. So I'm contacting you. What ends up happening is on the marketing team, when they receive that, they're going to bring it to their PR person. First, they're always going to bring it to their PR person. The PR person then decides whether or not to bring it to the security team or bring it to their legal team. So I want you all to know that this is one of the reasons also why vulnerability disclosure policies are so needed, because if we don't have a contact email address, we're going to just go through social media, which sets us up where we're going to have a hard time anyway, because marketing and security don't talk with each other most of the time. So just do keep that in mind next time that you're trying to submit a vulnerability or to inform an organization about a vulnerability. Try not to do it through social media, because it's owned by marketing team, and your security team at that company, most likely we wish that it was going to them. So try whatever you can. I know it takes a lot of time and energy and effort to try to contact someone on the security side of things or the engineering side. That's another way you can go about it. But DMing them on social media, it's going to lead you into a situation where you're not going to like sometimes. So I just want to throw it out there. I know this is totally different from what I talk about in this talk, but I just want people to know this, because I've been in the marketing side of the house, and I want you all to be aware of what happens usually when these things happen. All right, now let's go back into the talk on how to influence legislation. So let's go into here. So the thing that we all can realize is that we have laws right now that are preventing good hacking, because it was made to prevent attackers from doing something bad. But the thing was that most of the time that we have a lot of issues with legislation all around the world is when we don't have representation. So those aren't going to be impacted by laws that might be coming into the works. They need to be heard. If they're not heard, they get hurt. And so having representation matters. But the thing is that most of our legislators don't know anything about information security. They have absolutely no idea that there are hackers and attackers. They think of us as one thing, which is bad people. So the thing is that we have to get out there and talking to representatives. We have to work with legislators because they don't know that we exist, in a sense. And that we have to challenge their socially constructed beliefs because the laws that are created were back in the 80s. So we're in 2021. It's been quite some time, and we need some changes and adjustments to showcase where we are today in society. But the one that I want to always talk about with you is the CFA. I'm not going to talk about the DMCA. I just know that it provides a chilling effect when it comes to us. But the CFA, so the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, was passed in 1984. But what it is it's completely out of date. It offers prosecutors basically discretion of threatening huge potential fines and jail sentences for relatively undeserving violations of a computer policy. So the CFA is written, punishes exceeding authorized access to a protected computer. It's a phrase vague enough to inspire some really broad interpretations. Another flaw in the CFA is the redundant provisions that enable a person to be punished multiple times for the exact same crime. These charges can be stacked one on top of another, resulting in a threat of a higher cumulative fines, but also jail time for the exact same violation. This also allows prosecutors to bully defendants into accepting a deal in order to avoid facing a multitude of charges from a single solitary act. It also plays a significant role in sentencing as well. The ambiguity of a provision meant to toughen sentencing for basically repeat offenders of the CFA may in fact make it impossible for defendants to be sentenced based on what should be prior convictions, but were nothing more than multiple convictions for the same crime. Now, the other thing to understand is that the CFA gives absolute rights to companies, the right to sue. So the thing you need to know is that hackers have more to fear from companies and states right now than the Justice Department at this time. So keep that in mind. But the thing is, it's these major companies too that are preventing us having changes as well. And you may not know of this, but they are also known for lobbying to make sure that the CFA still exists, because they want to make sure that they can go after employees that step in a situation that they don't like. And this is one of the reasons why we had something called Aaron's Law that was trying to get passed, but it was blocked because of major tech lobbyists making sure that the CFA does not have any amendments or changes to it. So the thing to understand is that the CFA has been used against our community quite a bit. It's really vague. It does have redundancies. And the reason that the CFA was actually created to understand was because Ronald Reagan watched a special premiere of War Games and he freaked out. He panicked. He's like, we got to do something about these hackers, when he means attackers. And we need to do something about them fast. And that's how the CFA was created, was based on fear of some socially constructed belief that he watched in a movie. You see how powerful socially constructed beliefs can be? They can hurt people so much, not just one individual. We can talk about communities of people, because the reality is that we don't have representation. And we're going to keep seeing situations like this happen if we don't have representation at the top. And so that's why the CFA still exists to this day, is because one, the socially constructed beliefs are still there. Two, also our media hasn't changed too much on that front, and we still need to do that. A third is that we have major tech lobbyist companies out there that don't want the CFA to have any changes, because that vagueness helps them and that fear helps them go after their own employees that do something that they don't like. So please keep that in mind, that that's why we have to work with the media organizations like tech companies to try to change this, because the lobbyists are definitely preventing this change. Now, the other thing to note is that the CFA does have some extreme dire situations that do happen. And I just briefly want to point out someone that had something terrible happen to them because of the CFA. You may not know of Aaron Schwartz, but I want to tell you a little about Aaron Schwartz, because it's his story that also made this talk happen. So in 2011, Carmen Ortiz, the US Attorney's Office, charged Schwartz with hacking into the MIT computer network to download millions of scholarly articles from JSTOR. It was an act of civil disobedience, but it was meant to protest the restricted access to research funded by taxpayers. He believed that this stuff, research, should be open to the public, since the public is paying and funding for it. But the thing was that the US attorney decided they wanted to make him an example. And this is the thing that I hate to see, is when companies and governments do this to people. When we make people into examples to scare other people, it works. I get it. It works. But the other thing, that it is disgusting and disturbing on so many levels. So the thing is that the US attorney brought charges that carried a maximum penalty of 35 years in prison for Aaron, and including 1 million in fines. Now, the reason that he was able to be charged with 35 years in prison was because of how the CFA was written, that it allows you to stack upon stack, that you can be charged multiple times for the same offense. But I want to hold right there and also have you understand one thing. So him doing this does not cause any harm. It doesn't hurt an individual. It doesn't physically hurt another individual. But yeah, he was facing 35 years of prison. Now, if you murdered someone, it is 25 years minimum in prison. So you kind of can understand when people are upset about the CFA and the redundancies, and how they can charge so many years for something that does not even equate to even close of prison time. Murdering someone is taking someone's life. That is hurting an individual. That hurts. When you kill someone, you're harming the rest of the family. You're hurting the friends. You're doing a lot of harm to society when someone murders someone. But what he did, was that even close? No, not at all. But yet he was facing 35 years in prison. You see how absurd the CFA is? But you also have to understand how insane it must have been for him. He was looking at a legal battle that didn't have an end date at all. It was 17 months into this, and he had no set trial date. He didn't know when it was going to end. He was 26, and it became hopeless for his own future, because all he wanted to do was provide research that was funded by taxpayers' money for the world to have access to it. And the saddest part about it was that it must have hurt him a lot. I could not imagine how dark it must have been for him to feel like you have no control of your life, and that for people are seeing you as this horrible monster, when in reality, what you were doing is it's not being a horrible monster. You were trying to do something right. It was kind of like a hacktivist situation. It wasn't going to hurt anyone. But unfortunately, we lost him. And you have to understand that, yes, the federal prosecutors went on to drop the charges. Great. But they should have done that a long time ago. And it was his family that also believes that it was the government's prosecution that contributed to his decision to end his own life. And the thing is that we have to recognize that we need to fix this situation. And that's why Aaron's Law was something that was important. It was written after his passing to make sure that no one ever has to face what he had to face. But it was blocked. So the thing is, the reason why we need improvements to legislation is so then all Forbes Global 2000 have some sort of vulnerability disclosure policies, and that 100% of hackers can report vulnerabilities, that laws encourage good hacking, and that there wouldn't be any more prosecuting of hackers and decrease the number of malicious actors. And there are things that you can do right now, which is be bold, be kind, go vote, and know who your local representatives, because it's those representatives that are going to make these decisions for you. And you can find it right here. There's a reason why they're preventing you from voting and why there's all these voting restriction laws coming into process is because voting matters. Your vote counts. And that's why when putting down restrictions, it's preventing change from happening. So it's important to talk to your representatives. They're representing you as the population that they serve. So set up a call with them or get a meeting in person. Let us know, contact Hack Not Crime, and we'll come in and we'll join you. You shouldn't go out alone. But the thing is, we need to start having these conversations. We need legislators to step up and be strong for us because we're trying to be strong to protect and serve this country. It's time for them to do the same. Now, the other thing is to collaborate with organizations. So volunteering is one of those things, but I really want to talk about vulnerability disclosure. Every single organization should have one because vulnerability disclosure will reduce your breaches. It provides a diverse backgrounds to find the bugs that your security team is going to miss, but it also allows bilateral trust between organizations and hackers to keep security in check. And also, let's be real, you cannot rely on scanners to know what to patch. But the thing is, if you do have vulnerability disclosure policies or you don't have it, make sure to state what's in scope, what's out of scope. Don't write it for attorneys, write it for English learners, because most of the time we don't understand what you're writing and then we get in trouble. So the thing is really important is to write it for English learners. Don't write it for another attorney to understand because we're not attorneys, we're researchers. Contact information. Who do we contact? So we don't have to DM someone on the marketing team finds it. And we want communications updated very often. Now, it's also important is that if you're running your own vulnerability disclosure policies, make sure you have a dedicated person to manage, prioritize, and task it. And if you can't, look into platforms that can, such as BugCrowd, HackerOne, and Synac. Now, if you are trying to fix your disclosure policies, go ahead and check out disclose.io. It's a great resource to start that blueprint of having your own vulnerability disclosure policies at your organization. But also they have a listing of all the companies that are practicing safe harbor in a sense. So it's important for you to also know about this list. And if there's any companies that are missing on there, go ahead and add it to it. And besides disclosure, once again, it's really important to volunteer and give, such as to the EFF, I'm the Calvary, CircleCC, CTI League, Disclose.io, Hacking Is Not Crime, because we're working to change things and we have to work together to change things. So overall summary, I know I went a little bit over time here, is get involved. Check out hackingsnotacrime.org, become an advocate with us if you want, volunteer and support organizations that are out there in the community, but also note that we have to work with the press and we need to work with legislators to get about a change. But remember, whatever you do publicly and behind closed doors, just remember to have empathy and be kind, because most of the time people just don't know better. And it's up to us to inform them. And just remember, the one thing I want you to take away from this entire talk is that the change starts with you and me. I know that sounds like really corny in many ways, but the reality is that is true. Let's honor Aaron Schwartz's life by doing something to prevent so there will never, ever be another case like Aaron Schwartz. We owe it to our community. Thank you all so much for existing. Thank you so much to the conference for having me. And I'm sorry I went a little bit over time here. But I'm here to answer any questions within Discord, and thank you so much. And I hope you all are staying safe and having a wonderful weekend. So take care, everyone, and thank you.